Luna, the mother, expelled an Omega who was visiting her son's grave until the Omega's baby turned into a silver wolf and everyone knelt before her. Everyone treated the Omega with contempt, thinking she was weak, until the moment the ground shook with the howl of something that no one should ever have awakened. Snow fell heavily on Eclipse Moon Manor, an imposing gray stone estate that had dominated the Werewolf Valley for 3 generations. Elena Vance, just 19 years old, scrubbed the marble floor of the main hallway with her hands already red and cracked from the cold and abrasive soap. She was known as the Omega without a wolf, the silent maid who had never shifted, never heard the voice of her inner beast. To the Eclipse Moon Pack, she was invisible, less than a wolf, less than a person. But Elena carried a secret that burned in her chest like embers hidden beneath ashes. A secret that, if discovered, would mean her death sentence. And that secret was only 2 months old, hidden in a tiny room in the servants' basement. 6 months earlier, the pack's heir, Marcus Sterling, had left for war against the renegades of the North. Marcus was everything an alpha son should be, strong, brave, with golden brown hair and emerald green eyes that seemed to see through the masks everyone wore. He was kind to the servants, unlike his mother, Luna Ruth Sterling, a woman of icy beauty and an even colder heart. Ruth ruled the mansion with an iron fist, punishing any sign of weakness with calculated cruelty. Marcus was the only light in that dark place, and Elena had fallen in love with him in the most dangerous way possible, quietly, secretly, knowing that such a love could only end in tragedy. But Marcus loved her too, and for 3 stolen months, they met in secret in the shadows of the forest. When I return, Marcus had whispered on the last night before he left, holding Elena's face in his hands, I will claim you publicly. I don't care what my mother says, I don't care what the council thinks. Elena had cried, knowing that would never happen, an Omega without a wolf would never be accepted as the mate of an alpha heir. Promise you'll wait for me, he had begged, kissing her with a desperation that seemed to foreshadow the future. I promise, Elena lied, because promising was easier than telling the truth, that she already knew she was losing him. 2 weeks later, the news arrived, Marcus had died in combat, torn apart by a pack of renegades. He never knew that Elena was carrying his daughter in her womb. Elena hid her pregnancy with a mastery born of desperation. She wore loose clothing, worked twice as hard to avoid suspicion, and when the nausea came, she blamed it on a persistent flu. The other servants suspected, but said nothing. There was a silent solidarity among the oppressed. At 7 months, when she could no longer hide her belly, Elena pretended to be sick and locked herself in her tiny room in the basement. It was there, alone in the darkness, biting a cloth to stifle her cries, that she gave birth to a tiny but perfect baby girl. The baby had Marcus's eyes, that unmistakable emerald green, and a tuft of silver hair so light it looked white. Elena named her Silas, a strong name meaning, of the forest, because it was in the forest that she and Marcus had made love. For the next 2 months, Elena lived a nightmare of exhaustion and terror. She worked during the day, sleeping only 2 or 3 hours a night, waking up at every muffled cry from Silas. She breastfed the baby hidden in cupboards, changed diapers made from old cloths, and prayed that no one would find out. The other maids helped her as best they could, bringing milk and food, standing guard when Elena needed to care for the child. But it was only a matter of time before someone found out, before Ruth Sterling went down to the basement and found living proof of her dead son's betrayal. Elena knew she had to run, but where to? A lone Omega with a baby would be hunted down and killed in a matter of days. So she waited, each day a torture, each night a stolen blessing with her daughter in her arms. Today marked exactly 6 months since Marcus's death. The mansion was in an uproar because Alpha Kelvin Sterling, Marcus's father and leader of the pack, had called a special meeting with visiting alphas from neighboring territories. Ruth Sterling was busy supervising the preparations in the main hall, barking orders at the terrified servants. For the first time in weeks, Elena had a few hours to herself, a few precious hours when she could breathe without fear of being discovered. She looked out the dirty basement window and saw the pack cemetery on the distant hill, where white marble headstones marked the dead of generations. The largest of all was that of Marcus Sterling, erected in the center like a monument to the golden son who would never return. Elena felt her heart tighten. She had never been able to say goodbye to him properly, never been able to cry openly over his grave. Elena wrapped Silas in thick woolen blankets, shielding the baby's perfect little face from the bitter December cold. "Let's go visit your daddy," she whispered, kissing Silas's warm forehead. "He never got to meet you, but I know he would have loved you more than anything in this world." The baby looked up at her with those impossible green eyes, so much like Marcus's that Elena had to look away sometimes because the pain was too much to bear. She tucked Silas against her chest, securing her with a shawl, and carefully climbed the servants' stairs. The hallway was empty, everyone was busy with the meeting. Elena slipped out the side door and ran across the snow-covered garden, her heart pounding like a war drum. If she was caught, it would be the end. But she had to do this, she had to introduce her daughter to the man she had loved, she had to say goodbye in the only way left to her. The packed cemetery was surrounded by wrought iron fences, gates that creaked ominously in the wind. Elena pushed the half-open gate and entered, her footsteps sinking into the fresh snow that covered the paths between the graves. The air was heavy with the silence of the dead, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the pine trees. Elena walked among the old gravestones until she reached the center, where Marcus's white marble mausoleum stood like a miniature cathedral. The words engraved in gold letters shone even under the cloudy sky: Marcus Alexander Sterling, beloved son and heir, may his soul run eternally under the full moon. Elena fell to her knees in the snow before the tomb, holding Silas to her chest, and finally allowed the tears she had held back for 6 months to flow freely. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice breaking, "I brought someone to meet you." Elena pulled back Silas's blankets, revealing the sleeping baby's face. "She has your eyes," Elena cried, gently tracing her daughter's rosy cheek. "And I think she'll have your strength, too. She's already so strong, Marcus. She fights to live every day, just like you fought." Elena rested her head on the cold marble of the tomb, imagining she could feel Marcus there, imagining he could hear her through the veil between the living and the dead. "You said you'd come back to me. You promised we'd be together. But now I'm alone, and I don't know what to do. Your mother, if she finds out about Silas, she'll kill us. I know she will." The baby stirred, opening her eyes and looking up at the gray sky. For one crazy moment, Elena thought she saw Marcus reflected in those green eyes, smiling at her like he used to smile when they were alone in the forest. "How dare you?" The voice cut through the air like a blade, loud and vibrant with fury. Elena froze, her blood turning to ice. She turned slowly and saw Ruth Sterling standing a few feet away, her normally controlled face contorted with pure hatred. Luna wore a black fur coat that made her look like a dark queen, her ice-blue eyes fixed on Elena as if she wanted to burn her alive with her gaze alone. Behind her, 2 burly guards from the pack emerged from the mist between the graves, their hands already moving to the weapons at their belts. Ruth advanced like a storm, each step deliberate and deadly. "Bringing your bastard child to the sacred grave of my son," she spat, her voice rising with each word. "You dare desecrate this place with your shame, with your filth." Elena pressed Silas to her chest, instinctively protecting the baby. "Luna, Ruth, please, let me explain." "Silence!" Ruth shouted, and the sound echoed among the gravestones like thunder. The crows in the pine trees took flight, cawing in alarm. Ruth Sterling trembled with fury, her ice-blue eyes burning with a hatred so intense that Elena could feel it as physical heat. 6 months, Ruth hissed, stepping closer, 6 months since I buried my only son, my heir, the light of my life. And you, a worthless omega, a cleaner, dare bring your shameful mistake to mock my pain." Elena tried to back away, but her back was already against the cold marble mausoleum. "It's not mockery, Luna Ruth, I swear. I loved Marcus, we loved." Ruth gave a bitter, cruel laugh that sounded more like a bark. "You don't know what love is, you pathetic creature. You seduced my son like the slut you are, contaminating his pure bloodline with your inferior blood." Ruth gestured violently to the guards. Guards! Remove this desecrator from the sacred cemetery now. The two guards advanced without hesitation, their faces hard and emotionless. The taller one, a man named Derek with scars crisscrossing his face, grabbed Elena by her blonde hair and pulled her violently away from the grave. Elena screamed in pain but held Silas tightly against her chest, protecting the baby with her own body. Please. You're hurting, but Derek dragged her through the snow as if she were a sack of trash, not caring when Elena's knees hit the stones on the path. The second guard, younger but equally brutal, kicked Elena in the back as she tried to get up, knocking her face first into the snow. Omega trash, he spat. You should have been expelled long ago. Elena tasted blood in her mouth, but she held Silas tighter, whispering desperately, It's okay, baby, Mommy's here, Mommy will protect you. Ruth Sterling followed them like a vengeful shadow, her high heels leaving sharp marks in the snow. Look at her, Ruth sneered, pointing at Elena as she struggled to get up. Look at the little whore trying to play mother. Do you think this mistake has any right to exist? Do you think you have the right to bring life while my son rots in his grave? Ruth's words were like lashes, each one designed to cut deeper than the last. Elena managed to get to her knees, hugging Silas who was now beginning to cry, feeling the fear and tension emanating from his mother. She's innocent, Elena pleaded, tears streaming down her bruised face. Whatever your anger at me, she's just an innocent baby. Innocent? Ruth laughed again, that horrible, empty sound. She's proof of your betrayal, of your manipulation. You deceived my son, made him think you were something more than trash. Derek grabbed Elena again, this time taking her arm and brutally twisting it behind her back. Elena screamed, almost dropping Silas, but at the last second she managed to hold the baby secure against her chest with her other arm. Let me hold her. Elena cried. Please, no matter what you do to me, just let me hold her. But the younger guard, following Ruth's silent orders, stepped forward and snatched Silas from Elena's arms so forcefully that he tore the shawl that held the baby. No. Elena's scream echoed across the entire cemetery, a sound of animal pain so deep that it silenced even the birds. She thrashed against Derek, biting, scratching, fighting with a strength born of pure desperation. My daughter. Give me back my daughter. But Derek held her tight, his fingers digging into the flesh of Elena's arm like claws, while the other guard held Silas awkwardly, the baby now crying at full volume. Ruth Sterling looked at the whimpering baby in the guard's arms, and something flashed across her face, perhaps curiosity, perhaps recognition, but mostly disgust. She stepped closer, studying Silas with cold, critical eyes. For a moment, Elena saw Luna falter, saw her eyes widen as she noticed the impossible emerald green color of the baby's eyes. No. Ruth whispered, reaching out, her hand trembling slightly as she touched Silas's face. But then she pulled herself together, her mask of hatred returning to place. Even if this creature bears some resemblance to Marcus, even if you somehow impregnated him, it changes nothing. Ruth recoiled as if Silas were poisonous. This bastard has no place in the Sterling bloodline. She is a stain, a mistake that must be erased. Ruth turned to the guard holding Silas. Leave her here. If she is to die, let her die on hallowed ground like her father. You can't. Elena yelled, fighting with renewed strength against Derek. She managed to bite his hand, causing the guard to growl in pain and loosen his grip for a second. Elena broke free and ran toward the guard holding Silas, but she didn't get more than 3 steps before Derek knocked her down again, this time putting a knee in her back, pinning her to the snow. Elena couldn't breathe, the man's weight crushing her lungs, but she still screamed, She's your granddaughter. Ruth, look at her. She has Marcus's eyes. She's his blood, she's all he has left. The words came out broken, desperate, but Ruth just turned her back. Marcus would never have stooped to touch something like you of his own free will, Ruth said with calculated coldness. You must have used some trick, some potion. This creature is nothing of mine. She waved her hand, a dismissive, cruel gesture. Throw the Omega out the gates. And leave the bastard here to freeze. Derek pulled Elena by the hair again, dragging her toward the iron gates of the cemetery. Elena clung to the snow, the stones, anything she could reach, leaving bloody marks where her nails broke against the frozen ground. Please, she begged, no longer with pride, only with pure maternal desperation. Ruth, I beg you. She'll freeze to death. She's only 2 months old. Please. But Ruth Sterling was made of ice and iron, and please did not move her. She stood by Marcus's grave, watching with a blank expression as Elena was dragged away from her daughter. The other guard placed Silas in the snow at the foot of Marcus's headstone, the baby still wrapped in blankets but now alone, vulnerable, her cries echoing through the cemetery like the sound of her own pain breaking. Elena saw it all through tears that blurred her vision, saw her small, helpless daughter being abandoned, and something inside her broke in a way that could never be repaired. Derek dragged her to the iron gates and literally threw her down the stairs, the marble steps leading to the cemetery entrance. Elena rolled, her body hitting each step with impacts that knocked the wind out of her and would leave bruises that would last for weeks. She finally came to rest on the bottom step, lying face down in the dirty snow on the road, her body a mass of pain. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the agony in her heart. She tried to get up, tried to crawl back to the gates, but Derek was standing above her, looking down with a mixture of pity and duty. Don't come back here, Omega, he warned, his voice softer now that Ruth couldn't hear him. If Luna catches you trying to get in again, she'll do worse than kick you out. She'll kill you. The iron gates closed with a sound of finality, the chains being locked from the other side. Elena was on the outside. Silas was on the inside. And between them was a chasm Elena could not cross. Elena crawled on her knees to the gates, clutching the iron bars with bloody hands. Through the bars, she could see the cemetery on the hill, could hear Silas's increasingly faint cries echoing in the distance. Silas! Elena screamed, her voice torn and desperate. Mommy's here. Hang on, baby. But the wind was growing stronger, the snow falling heavier, and Elena knew that a 2-month-old baby would not survive long exposed to the elements. She pulled on the bars with all her strength, but they were solid, unyielding. She tried to climb over, but her hands were so bruised and weak that she slipped and fell back into the snow. Desperate, Elena began digging in the snow beneath the gates, trying to make a hole large enough to squeeze through, but the earth was frozen solid as rock. Her fingernails broke, her fingers bled, but she kept digging, as Silas's cries grew weaker and weaker. Inside the cemetery, Ruth Sterling was still standing beside Marcus's grave, looking down at the baby at her feet. Silas had stopped crying so loudly now, his little body shaking violently from the cold. The blankets were getting wet with snow, losing their warmth. Ruth looked at that perfect little face, saw the emerald green eyes that were identical to her dead son's, and for a moment, just a brief moment, something like doubt crossed her expression. Marcus, she whispered to the gravestone, her voice breaking for the first time. Could it be, could she have been telling the truth? But then Ruth narrowed her eyes, pushing away any spark of compassion. Compassion was weakness. Weakness killed. She had learned that long ago, in circumstances that had made her the woman of ice she was today. No, Ruth said firmly, more to herself than to anyone else. It doesn't matter whose child this is. She has no place here. Ruth turned and began walking toward the cemetery exit, leaving the baby behind without looking back. But Silas, abandoned in the snow at the foot of her father's grave, was not quiet out of resignation. The baby's crying had changed, turning into something different, no longer a cry of hunger or discomfort, but a primitive, guttural sound that came from a deep, ancient place within her. It was a sound that no human or werewolf baby should be capable of making. Silas's small hands clenched into tiny fists, her fingers contracting and relaxing as if she were grasping something invisible. Her emerald green eyes, so similar to Marcus's, began to glow, not metaphorically, but literally glowing with an inner golden light that pulsed like a beating heart. The blankets around her began to move, not from the wind, but from something coming from within the baby's own body. Ruth, who was halfway to the gates, stopped abruptly, sensing something in the air change. The temperature around Marcus's grave began to rise, the heat emanating from Silas's small body melting the snow in a perfect circle around her. Silas's crying intensified, but now it had an overlapping echo, a low, impossible growl that made the surrounding gravestones tremble. Ruth turned slowly, her eyes widening in shock and horror as she watched something that defied all the laws of werewolf nature. Silas's skin began to ripple, like water disturbed by a stone, bright silver patterns dancing beneath the surface. The guards who were still in the cemetery instinctively backed away, their wolf instincts screaming danger in a primal voice they couldn't ignore. "Impossible," Ruth whispered, taking an involuntary step backward. "Babies don't, they can't," but her words died in her throat as the transformation accelerated, as Silas's body began to change in ways no child so young should be capable of. The baby's bones cracked and stretched, a sound like branches snapping under weight, but there were no cries of pain, only that growing growl that now made the very air vibrate. Outside the gates, Elena felt the change too. The air became charged with static electricity, making her hair stand on end. A strange smell reached her, ozone and metal, like before a storm, mixed with something sweet and impossible to identify. "Silas?" Elena whispered, pressing her face against the cold iron bars. And then she saw it, a silvery light began to emanate from the center of the cemetery, so bright that Elena had to shield her eyes. The light grew and grew, blinding like a second sun rising in the middle of winter, casting harsh, black shadows across the graves. Elena heard screams from inside the cemetery, heard Ruth Sterling shout something unintelligible, and then, a howl. Not a baby's cry, but a howl, sharp and piercing, that made all the windows of Eclipse Moon Manor in the distance shatter simultaneously. The sound cut through the entire valley, causing wolves miles away to stop what they were doing and stare at the cemetery with expressions of ancient terror. Silas' transformation was complete in a matter of seconds, but each second felt like an eternity. Where once there had been a 2-month-old baby, now there was a silver wolf cub the size of a medium-sized dog, impossible for something so young, but there it was. The cub's fur wasn't simply silver, it was luminescent, each hair seeming to be made of solidified moonlight that glowed with its own intensity. The eyes were no longer human emerald green, but pure gold, no white, no distinct pupil, just circles of liquid gold that burned with an intelligence that transcended age or species. The cub rose on 4 unsteady legs, but even as it staggered, there was a grace about it that was purely predatory. Its small claws scratched at the marble of Marcus's tombstone, leaving deep marks in the stone as if it were butter. Around the cub, the snow didn't just melt, it evaporated, creating a cloud of steam that swirled around the little silver wolf as if it were a creature straight out of a terrifying and beautiful fairy tale. Ruth Sterling was frozen in place, her brain refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. She had lived 45 years as a werewolf, had witnessed hundreds of first transformations, but never anything like this. Baby werewolves did not transform. It was an absolute law of nature. The first transformation occurred at puberty, usually between the ages of 12 and 16, when hormones awakened the beast within. Children did not have the mental control or physical strength to withstand the transformation. And yet, there was the impossible proof, a cub that should not exist, shining like a fallen star before the grave of her dead son. "Wolf. Silver wolf," Ruth whispered, the words coming out shaky. She knew the legends, the ancient stories told by the elders late at night. The silver wolves, the Argentum lineage, the first and most powerful of all werewolves, considered extinct 3,000 years ago. They were kings among wolves, their powers as far beyond normal alphas as alphas were beyond humans. And they could do impossible things, like transform from birth. The silver pup turned its head toward Ruth, those golden eyes fixing on her with an intensity that made Luna take another step back. There was no innocence in that gaze, no trace of the helpless baby from moments ago. There was only judgment, pure and terrible, as if the creature could see through Ruth to her tainted soul and find her wanting. The cub opened its mouth, too small to be a real threat, but full of teeth as sharp as needles, and growled, a sound that made Ruth's blood run cold. It was the sound of a predator that knew no fear, that recognized no hierarchy or authority. It was the sound of royalty in its purest, most brutal form. The two guards, Derek and the younger one named Thomas, had fallen to their knees involuntarily, their heads bowed in instinctive submission. Their inner wolves knew they were in the presence of something above them in the natural order, something that demanded respect even from within the bodies of babies. "Luna Ruth," Derek said in a strangled voice, still staring at the floor, "what do we do?" Ruth couldn't answer. She was caught between terror and something dangerously close to admiration. If this creature was truly a silver wolf, if the ancient prophecy was returning, the implications were unimaginable. Silver wolves did not submit to ordinary alphas. They were alphas, above even kings. A silver wolf could challenge the council of elders, could unite or destroy packs with a single command. And this creature, this impossible baby, carried sterling blood. She was Ruth's granddaughter, whether she accepted it or not. Ruth felt her worldview, built on rigid hierarchy and pride of lineage, begin to crack. She is, Ruth began, but couldn't finish the sentence. The cub took a wobbly step toward Ruth, and Luna instinctively backed away, nearly tripping over a low gravestone. The little wolf stopped, tilting its head as if confused by Ruth's reaction. And then, to everyone's utter shock, the cub began to speak, not with words, but with a telepathic projection that sounded directly in the minds of everyone in the cemetery, "M.O.M. I want. M.O.M. The mental voice was young, confused, frightened, but it carried a weight of power that made even Ruth stumble and fall backward into the snow. The cub began to whimper, the sound mixing with that impossible guttural growl, creating a dissonance that made their ears hurt. "M.O.M., the voice projected again, louder, more desperate. And with that projection came a wave of psychic pressure that swept through the cemetery like an invisible tsunami. Derek and Thomas screamed, clutching their heads, feeling as if their skulls were about to split in two. Ruth managed to resist, but only because she was an experienced Luna, and even then she felt blood trickling from her nose under the pressure. The cub was losing control, its powers shooting out in all directions like loose lightning. The surrounding gravestones began to crack, lines of fissures running across the marble like spider webs. Marcus's own tomb shook, pieces of stone falling from its ornate surface. And through it all, the silver cub continued to call, his mental voice echoing not only throughout the cemetery, but across the entire valley, "M.O.M. M.O.M. M.O.M. Outside the gates, Elena heard the call in her mind like a hook burrowing into her soul. "Silas," she screamed, pulling at the bars with renewed strength, strength she shouldn't have. Something was happening inside her too, something that had been dormant for 19 whole years. Her eyes, normally a dull light brown, began to change, flecks of silver and gold bleeding through her irises. Her skin tingled, bones that had never changed before beginning to ache with the promise of transformation. "No," Elena gasped, feeling panic rise. She was an Omega without a wolf, she had always been an Omega without a wolf. She had no beast inside her, no supernatural strength. But then why could she feel something awakening inside her, something vast and furious that had been dormant, suppressed, sealed away for so long that she had forgotten it was there? "My daughter needs me," Elena whispered, and with those words, something inside her broke, not broke like a fragile thing shattering, but broke like chains snapping, like ancient prison seals finally giving way. Elena's transformation began differently than Silas. It was not instantaneous or smooth. It was violent, 19 years of suppression being undone at once. Elena screamed, but the scream turned into a howl halfway through. Her bones shattered and reformed, not with delicate cracks but with sounds like tree trunks being split. Her skin tore as silver fur, not gray, not brown, but silver like Silas's, burst through the surface. She grew, and grew, and grew, doubling in size, tripling, until there was nothing human left. In place of Elena Vance, the weak, wolfless Omega, stood a colossal silver wolf, larger than any alpha who had ever lived. She stood nearly 8 feet tall at the shoulders, with jaws that could crush rocks and claws that gleamed like polished metal. Her eyes were pure gold, identical to Silas, burning with a maternal fury that would make gods retreat. And when she roared, the sound was not that of a wolf, it was that of a primordial deity, a sound that should never come from a mortal throat. The roar made the earth shake, caused avalanches to fall from distant mountains, made every wolf within 100 kilometers bow in instinctive submission. The gigantic silver wolf that was Elena did not think, did not hesitate. She threw herself against the iron gates of the cemetery with a force that defied physics. The metal that had withstood centuries of storms and weather had no chance against the fury of a mother separated from her cub. The iron bars bent like dry branches, the chains shattered like glass, and the entire 3-meter-high structure was torn from its stone foundations with a tearing sound of metal. Elena walked through the wreckage as if it were paper, her huge paws leaving deep craters in the snow and frozen earth. She felt no pain when shards of iron cut into her silver fur, no cold when snow whipped her face. All that existed in her world now was her daughter's telepathic call, "MOM. MOM." Echoing in her mind like a beacon guiding her through the darkness. Every muscle in Elena's massive body contracted with a single purpose, to reach Silas, to protect Silas, to kill anything that dared to stand between them. Ruth Sterling saw the colossal silver wolf climbing the cemetery hill, and her brain simply refused to process it for a moment. This couldn't be Elena. Elena was an Omega without a wolf, a weak servant who had never transformed in 19 years of life. But those eyes, those angry, magnificent golden eyes, were unmistakable. "Moon goddess protect us," Ruth whispered, staggering backward as the wolf approached. Elena had to weigh over 500 pounds of pure muscle and fury, each step making the ground shake. She was so large that her head was level with the tops of the tallest headstones, her shadow swallowing Ruth completely when she stopped between Luna and the cub. Derek and Thomas, the guards who had brutalized Elena minutes ago, didn't even attempt to intervene. They crawled away, their inner wolves screaming to run, to flee, that confronting this creature was suicide. Ruth stood alone, facing the beast she herself had created with her cruelty. Elena lowered her enormous head, her snout inches from Ruth's pale face. The wolf's hot breath created clouds of vapor in the cold air, and Ruth could see every dagger-sharp tooth in the mouth that could bite her in half in a single movement. But Elena did not attack. Instead, a voice echoed in Ruth's mind, Elena's voice, but amplified 1,000 times, carrying the weight of generations of ancestral power. "You touched my daughter." Each word struck Ruth's consciousness like a hammer, making her stagger. "You ripped her from my arms. You abandoned her to die in the cold. You called my baby a bastard." Elena was growling now, a low sound that Ruth could feel resonating in her own bones. "Give me one reason, not to rip your throat out right now." Ruth opened her mouth, but no sound came out. What could she say? How could she defend herself against an accusation that was absolutely true? But before Ruth could find her voice, the little silver pup that was Silas staggered toward Elena, his movements still uncoordinated and unsteady. The pup reached Elena's massive paws and rubbed against them, whimpering softly. The change in Elena was instant and striking. All the murderous fury evaporated, replaced by a tenderness so deep that even Ruth felt a twinge in her heart of stone. The giant wolf lowered her head and gently, with a care that seemed impossible for such a large creature, picked up the pup by the scruff of its neck with her mouth. Silas relaxed immediately, trusting his mother completely, his little body swaying gently as Elena lifted him off the ground. The wolf turned, preparing to leave, but stopped when she saw that the path was blocked. Arriving at the cemetery, attracted by the roar and explosion of power, were dozens of wolves from the Eclipse Moon Pack, including Alpha Kelvin Sterling, Ruth's husband and Marcus's father. Kelvin Sterling was an impressive man even in human form, nearly 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, gray hair slicked back, steel-gray eyes that normally commanded absolute obedience. He wore an expensive suit now stained with snow, having run from his meeting when he sensed the disturbance. Behind him were his best warriors, a dozen alpha wolves in their beast forms, black, gray, and brown wolves, all large and deadly. But when they saw Elena, they all stopped. Even Kelvin, who had led the Eclipse Moon Pack for 25 years and faced countless threats, felt a chill of primal fear run down his spine. "Ruth," he called, his eyes still fixed on Elena, "what the hell is going on here?" Ruth finally found her voice, still trembling. It's Elena. "And the creature she's carrying." "Kelvin, it's a silver wolf. A cub that has transformed." Kelvin looked at his wife as if she had gone mad, but then his eyes turned to the small, shiny silver cub in Elena's mouth, and he saw the golden eyes, saw the impossible fur. "Impossible," he whispered. But then Kelvin saw something else. He saw the familiar markings on the pup's left ear, a genetic quirk that all Sterlings carried. He had seen the same mark on his own son Marcus since birth. "No," Kelvin gasped, taking a staggering step forward. "It can't be. Marcus?" He looked at Elena, really looked at her for the first time in years of indifference. "This pup is Marcus's." Elena, still in wolf form, gently placed Silas on the ground between her huge paws, protecting the pup with her own body. When she spoke telepathically, her voice reached not only Kelvin but all the wolves present. "Your son Marcus and I loved each other. We met in secret because we knew we would never be accepted. He died without knowing I was carrying his daughter." Elena looked directly at Kelvin with those flaming golden eyes. "This is Silas Sterling, your granddaughter. And your wife has just condemned her to death simply for existing." A shocked murmur rippled through the assembled wolves. Kelvin looked at Ruth, who had paled even further. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "Did you know this child was Marcus's?" Ruth lifted her chin defensively. I suspected when I saw the eyes. But that doesn't change anything, Kelvin. She's the daughter of an Omega without a wolf, a servant. She can't be a Sterling heir. She's not just a Sterling heir." A new voice echoed through the graveyard, deep and resonant with absolute authority. Everyone turned to see a tall man with raven-black hair emerge from the shadows between the graves. He wore a long black overcoat that fluttered behind him like wings, and his eyes were of an amber so dark they appeared almost black. 2 intricate symbols were tattooed on his temples, the marks of the Alpha King. This was Silas Thorne, ruler of all the wolf packs on the western continent, a man who had not been seen in public for nearly a decade. "She is royalty," Silas continued, approaching with measured steps. No one dared stop him. Silas stopped a few feet away from Elena and, to everyone's shock, bowed deeply at the waist, a gesture of respect that a king would only offer to an equal. "Silver Wolf," Silas said formally, "I am Silas Thorne, and I am at your service." He stood up and looked at Kelvin and Ruth with a hard expression. "I was at your mansion for the meeting when I sensed the awakening. I felt the power of a silver wolf manifesting for the first time in 3,000 years. I came to investigate, and what do I find?" His voice turned icy. "I find a mother and daughter, both of the Argentum bloodline, being brutalized by the very family that should protect them." Silas gestured to the cub Silas, who now watched everything with curious, intelligent eyes. "You have no idea what you've done, what you've almost destroyed. Silver wolves aren't born, they are awakened when the bloodline is strong enough, when 2 complementary bloodlines come together. Marcus Sterling carried diluted silver blood, inherited from his paternal grandfather. Elena Vance clearly carries direct silver blood, though sealed." Silas turned to Ruth with eyes that could burn holes in steel. "You, Luna Ruth Sterling, attempted to murder your own granddaughter, a child who could have elevated the Sterling bloodline above all other packs. You attempted to murder a princess of silver blood." Ruth fell to her knees, finally understanding the magnitude of what she had done. It wasn't just cruelty, it was treason against the very essence of what it meant to be a werewolf. The silver wolves were revered in legend, considered blessed by the moon goddess herself. To kill one was blasphemy. Kelvin looked from Silas to Elena and back, his mind working quickly. He was a born politician, and he could see how this could play out. King Silas, Kelvin began carefully, there has been a terrible misunderstanding. If we had known, silence, Silas cut him off, his voice like a whip. Don't insult me with excuses. The facts are clear, Elena was brutalized. Her baby was left to die. This was no misunderstanding, it was deliberate malice. Silas looked at Elena. The decision is not mine. It is hers. Elena looked at Ruth Sterling kneeling in the snow, at Kelvin with his calculating expression, at the guards Derek and Thomas who had torn Silas from her arms. She felt the fury burning in her chest, the primal desire to avenge what had been done to her, to make them all pay with blood and pain. It would be so easy. One movement of her powerful jaw and Ruth would be dead. One charge and she could decimate the entire pack that had treated her like trash for 19 years. Elena could feel her inner wolf demanding blood, demanding vengeance for the humiliation, for the years of abuse, for the near death of her cub. But then Silas, the cub, whimpered softly between her paws, and Elena looked down. The little silver wolf stared up at her with those golden eyes so much like her own, so much like Marcus's. And Elena remembered Marcus, not Marcus the alpha heir, but Marcus the man who loved her, who was kind when he didn't have to be, who believed in mercy even when his training taught him cruelty. Marcus would have wanted me to be better, Elena thought. Elena transformed back into human form in a wave of silver light. It was more controlled this time, less violent, and within seconds she was kneeling naked in the snow, holding Silas, who had also reverted to baby form, against her chest. Someone threw a coat over Elena's shoulders, and she accepted it without looking to see who it was. When Elena spoke, her voice was soft but carried an echo of power that made the air vibrate. Ruth Sterling, you called me a desecrator. You said I mocked your pain by bringing my daughter to Marcus's grave. Elena stood up, wrapping Silas in the coat, protecting her from the cold. But I came here out of love. I came so my daughter could meet the father she never had a chance to know. You came here out of hatred, and that hatred nearly killed your own flesh and blood. Elena walked until she stood before Ruth, looking down at the kneeling Luna. You drove your granddaughter from your son's grave. But I will not drive her from our lives. That would be lowering myself to your level. Elena turned to Silas Thorne, the Alpha King, holding her daughter protectively. You said my blood was sealed. How? Why? Silas nodded gravely, gesturing for one of his guards to bring an antique chest that had been retrieved from his vehicle. The guard opened the chest, revealing yellowed parchments and books bound in weathered leather. Silas removed a specific parchment, carefully unrolling it to reveal a complex family tree written in silver ink that glowed even under the cloudy sky. The Argentum bloodline was nearly wiped out 3,000 years ago during the Wars of Purification. A fanatical cult called the Purebloods believed that wolves with powers so far beyond the norm were abominations that needed to be eliminated. They hunted down and slaughtered nearly all carriers of the silver blood. Silas traced a line on the tree with his finger. The few survivors went into hiding, diluting their blood through generations, creating magical seals to suppress their powers until it was safe to awaken again. Your maternal grandfather, Silas continued, pointing to a name on the parchment, Jonathan Vance, was one of the last known guardians of the pure Argentum bloodline. He married a woman of diluted silver blood, and their daughter, your mother, Catherine, was born with latent power. But the purebloods discovered where they were hiding when you were only 3 years old. Silas's voice grew somber. They attacked during the new moon. Your parents fought to protect you, but they knew they wouldn't survive. So your father did the only thing that could save you. He created a suppression seal so powerful that it completely erased your inner wolf, making you appear to be an ordinary Omega with no power. Elena felt tears burn her eyes. Fragmented memories she had suppressed for years began to surface: fire, screams, the smell of blood. I remember flames. And my father telling me not to make a sound, to pretend I was just human. Silas nodded solemnly. Your parents died buying time for you to escape. You were found by warriors from the Eclipse Moon Pack, specifically, by Marcus's grandfather, the former Alpha Thomas Sterling. He recognized the signs of the suppression seal, recognized what you were, but instead of protecting you as he should have, he saw an opportunity. Silas's voice was heavy with disdain. Thomas had diluted silver blood in his lineage, but not enough to manifest true powers. He kept you close, hoping that eventually you could be used to strengthen the Sterling lineage through an arranged marriage with his grandson Marcus when they were both grown. Elena looked at Kelvin with new understanding. So your father, he knew what I was all along. Kelvin suddenly looked old, the lines on his face deepening. My father told me on his deathbed 5 years ago. He made me promise to keep you close, to see that you and Marcus eventually came together. But then Marcus enlisted, and I thought I had time. I never imagined that you fell in love on your own, Silas finished, a touch of irony in his voice. Fate has a peculiar sense of humor. The arrangement Thomas planned happened naturally, without manipulation. He looked at Silas, the baby still in Elena's arms. And it created something extraordinary, the first pure silver wolf in millennia. The union of two silver bloodlines, one pure but sealed, the other diluted but active, created the perfect combination. Ruth Sterling, still kneeling in the snow, finally found her voice. If that's true, if Elena is of such a powerful lineage, why did she live as a servant? Why did we treat her like trash? The guilt in her voice was palpable now, the realization of what she had done crushing her. Why didn't Thomas tell us the truth? Silas looked at Ruth coldly. Because he was feeding Elena aconite, wolf poison, in doses low enough not to kill her, but high enough to keep the seal intact and her wolf dormant. He wanted her to remain weak and controllable until the right moment. Elena felt nausea rise in her throat. The special soups Thomas always insisted I drink. He said it was because I was weak and needed extra nutrients. They were poisoned, Silas confirmed brutally. When Thomas died and Kelvin took over, the poisoning stopped because Kelvin didn't know it needed to continue. But the seal was already so strong that your wolf remained dormant anyway, until today. The extreme emotional pain, the trauma of having your daughter ripped from you and left for dead, was powerful enough to break the seal at once. Elena looked at Silas in her arms, her precious daughter who had cost so much to bring into the world. So Silas, she inherited silver blood from both sides. From me, pure but sealed. From Marcus, diluted but active. Is that why she was able to transform so young? Silas nodded. She is what the ancient texts call, true awakening, a child born of two complementary silver bloodlines. She has no seals, no blocks. Her power is pure and unlimited from birth. One of Kelvin's warriors, a beta wolf named Richard, stepped forward nervously. Alpha Kelvin, if this child is so powerful, and if Elena is of pure silver bloodline, shouldn't they be under the protection of the pack? They are ours, they are Sterling blood. But Silas Thorne cut off that line of thinking immediately. They are not yours. Silver wolves do not belong to individual packs, they are above territorial politics. By ancient law, any silver wolf discovered falls under the direct protection of the crown, which means Elena and her daughter are now under my jurisdiction. Kelvin clenched his fists, struggling between his desire to keep his granddaughter and the recognition that defying an alpha king would be suicide for his pack. With all due respect, King Silas, she is still my granddaughter. Sterling blood runs in her veins. Surely we have some rights. Elena interrupted, her voice sharp as glass. You lost all rights when Ruth threw me down the stairs and left Silas to die. The air thickened with unspent power. Elena could feel her wolf pressing just below the surface, ready to surge forth again if necessary. Silas, sensing his mother's tension, began to glow softly, tiny sparks of silver energy dancing across his baby skin. Silas Thorne raised a hand, calling for attention. There is a procedure for situations like this. The Council of Elders must be convened to decide on custody and protection. They are the only ones with the authority to judge disputes involving ancient bloodlines. He looked directly at Kelvin and Ruth. You may present your case to the council, argue that as biological grandparents, you are entitled to some access to the child. But know this, the council weighs not only blood, but also actions. And your actions today were less than noble. Ruth closed her eyes, tears finally streaming down her normally impassive face. We hurt her. We hurt them both. I see that now. Kelvin helped Ruth to her feet, for once showing genuine tenderness toward his wife. King Silas, when will the council meet? Silas checked an elaborate pocket watch. They were summoned telepathically when the first awakening occurred. Silver wolves emit a psychic signature that can be detected across continents. The elders will be here by sunset, approximately 3 hours from now. He turned to Elena. Until then, you and your daughter will remain under my personal protection in my quarters. No one, and I mean no one, is to approach you without my explicit permission. Silas gestured to his guards, elite warriors wearing black tactical gear with the symbol of a silver crown emblazoned on their chests. 6 of them immediately formed a protective perimeter around Elena and Silas. You have 3 hours to prepare to face the council, Silas told Kelvin and Ruth. I suggest you use that time wisely. Elena allowed the guards to escort her out of the cemetery, but when she passed Ruth, she stopped. For a long moment, the two women stared at each other, the Luna who had ruled with an iron fist for decades, and the Omega she had despised, who now turned out to be royalty. Ruth, Elena said softly, and Luna flinched at hearing her first name instead of her formal title. You asked why I came here. Why I desecrated your son's grave with my presence. Elena adjusted Silas in her arms, allowing Ruth to see the baby's face clearly. I came here because Marcus deserved to know that his love created something beautiful. I came here because even though he is dead, he is Silas's father, and she deserves to know him in some way. Elena leaned closer, her voice lowering but not losing intensity. And I came here because I loved him, Ruth. Not for power, not for position, but because he saw me as a person when everyone else saw me as an object. That's something you, with all your lineage and pride, never understood, that real love doesn't respect hierarchy. Alpha King Silas Thorne's quarters at Eclipse Moon Manor were opulent in a way Elena had never experienced. She had cleaned luxurious rooms before, but she had never imagined that one day she would be inside one as a guest, not as a servant. The room was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking snow-capped mountains, a stone fireplace where a fire crackled merrily, and dark polished wood furniture that probably cost more than Elena would earn in 10 lifetimes. But Elena barely noticed the luxury. She was sitting in a soft leather armchair near the fire, Silas asleep in her arms, still in baby form now that the immediate threat had passed. Elena gently stroked her daughter's silver hair, marveling at how it seemed to capture and reflect the light from the fire. My little warrior, she whispered. You transformed before you even learned to speak. What else are you capable of? Silas Thorne stood near the window, speaking quietly into a sophisticated cell phone. Elena could hear snippets of the conversation with her newly awakened heightened senses, references to the council, to ancient protocols, to security measures that needed to be implemented. When he finally hung up, Silas turned to Elena with a serious expression. The Council of Elders will arrive in 2 hours. They are coming from their residences across the continent, some by helicopter, others through ancient magical portals that only they can access. He walked over to a small side table and poured 2 glasses of water, offering one to Elena. You need to understand the gravity of the situation. The council consists of 5 elders, each over 500 years old. They have seen empires rise and fall. They are not easily impressed, and they are not known for their mercy. Silas sat down in the armchair opposite Elena, his amber eyes studying her intently. They will ask questions. Difficult questions about your lineage, about your relationship with Marcus, about your suitability as a mother to such a powerful child. Elena felt a chill of fear run down her spine. Do you think they might take Silas away from me? The question came out as a strangled whisper. Silas hesitated, and that hesitation told Elena everything she needed to know. The council has the authority to do what they believe is best for the species as a whole. If they decide that Silas would be better raised in a different environment, say, at a special academy for wolves with exceptional powers, or under the tutelage of one of the elders, they have the power to decree it. He leaned forward, his voice softening. But Elena, you need to understand something important. You are no longer just a frightened Omega. You are a silver wolf, perhaps the last pure adult silver wolf in the world. That gives you a status that rivals my own. The council may be ancient and powerful, but even they must respect what you are. Elena absorbed this, feeling the truth of the word settle into her bones. She was powerful now. She had felt it when she transformed, felt the ancient strength coursing through her veins. Teach me, Elena said suddenly, looking into Silas's eyes with determination. You have 2 hours before the council arrives. Use that time to teach me everything I need to know about being a silver wolf, about council politics, about how to defend myself. Silas smiled for the first time since he had arrived at the cemetery, a genuine smile that transformed his hard face into something almost friendly. You have the spirit of a fighter. Good. You'll need it. He stood up and began pacing the room, his hands gesturing as he spoke. First, you need to understand the hierarchy of power. At the top are the silver wolves, you and Silas. Below them are the alpha kings like me, who rule entire territories. Below us are the pack alphas like Kelvin, who rule individual packs. Then come the betas, ordinary omegas who have wolves, and finally those without wolves or with weak wolves. Silas paused and looked directly at Elena. You've gone from near the bottom of the hierarchy to the top in a matter of minutes. That's going to scare a lot of people. Let them be scared, Elena replied, and there was steel in her voice now. I spent 19 years being trampled on. I will not bow down ever again, not to the council, not to anyone. Not when my daughter's safety is at stake. Silas nodded approvingly. Exactly the right attitude. But you need to channel that ferocity wisely. The council respects strength, but not reckless tolerance. He picked up one of the ancient books from the chest his guards had brought, opening it to a marked page. This is the Codex Argentum, the ancient laws governing the silver wolves. It was written 3,000 years ago and is still considered absolute law when it comes to your bloodline. Elena leaned in to look at the page, seeing text in a language she didn't recognize, but strangely, when she focused on the words, they seemed to rearrange themselves into something she could understand. How am I reading this? She asked, astonished. Your silver blood is reacting to the magic in the pages, Silas explained. The codex was written specifically so that only those with Argentum blood could read it. It's further proof of your lineage. Elena read quickly, absorbing information that seemed both new and strangely familiar, as if she were remembering something she had always known but had forgotten. There were laws about marriage, silver wolves chose their own mates, no arranged marriages were allowed, about offspring, children of silver wolves were considered sacred and could not be separated from their mothers before the age of 18 without consent, about challenges, anyone could challenge a silver wolf, but few were foolish enough to try. This section here, Elena pointed to a specific paragraph, says that a silver wolf has the absolute right to choose her own pack, or to not align with any pack. She looked at Silas. That means even if the council rules in favor of Kelvin and Ruth, I can just refuse. I can take Silas and leave. Silas grimaced. Technically, yes. But that would make you a renegade, without pack protection. And there are still the purebloods to consider. When Silas's awakening was sensed, it wasn't just the elders who noticed. The pureblood sensed it too. Elena's blood ran cold. Are you saying they'll come after us? After her? Silas nodded grimly. The purebloods have spent 3,000 years ensuring that silver wolves remain extinct. Now, suddenly, there are not just one, but two, a mother and daughter, a bloodline that could spread again. They won't let that go unanswered. He placed a comforting hand on Elena's shoulder. That's why my offer of protection isn't just generosity. It's necessity. Alone, even with all your power, you would eventually be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. But under the protection of the crown, with my armies and resources, you and Silas can be safe. Elena looked down at her sleeping daughter, so small and vulnerable despite the immense power she carried. So my choices are, accept the council's authority and potentially lose Silas, or become a renegade and put her in danger from the purebloods. The situation seemed impossible. Silas gently squeezed her shoulder. There is a third option. You impress the council so thoroughly that they have no choice but to recognize your right to raise Silas. And then you accept my protection, not as a subordinate, but as an ally. Before Elena could respond, an abrupt knock on the door interrupted their conversation. One of Silas' guards entered, his face tense. My king, the elders have arrived early. They demand an immediate audience. Silas cursed under his breath. How much time do we have? They are setting up the court in the great hall now. You have perhaps 15 minutes. The guard hesitated. Sir, there is more. Alpha Kelvin and Luna Ruth have brought witnesses. Servants who claim to have evidence about Elena's character. Elena felt anger burn in her stomach. Evidence about my character? You mean they're going to parade servants they've intimidated into lying about me? Silas stood up, his posture becoming stiff and formal. Don't underestimate Ruth Sterling. She may be shocked now, but she didn't get to Luna by being stupid. If she's bringing witnesses, she has a plan. He looked at Elena seriously. Are you ready for this? For a full trial of your character, your morals, your suitability as a mother? Elena stood up too, holding Silas against her chest. The baby woke up, blinking those emerald green eyes and looking up at her mother. For a moment, mother and daughter stared at each other, and Elena swore she could see understanding in that childish gaze, an awareness that something important was about to happen. I have no choice, Elena said, and her voice was firm despite the fear roaring inside her. They can question my character, they can bring up all the lies they want. But there is one truth that no one can deny: I love my daughter. I protected her when no one else would. I died for her if necessary. I would die 1,000 times over. Elena looked directly into Silas's eyes, without blinking. So yes, King Silas. I am ready. Take me to the council. And let them see what a mother willing to do anything is capable of. Silas smiled, a fierce, proud smile. Then let's show them exactly what the silver wolves are made of. He formally offered his arm, and Elena accepted it. Together, they left the room, the elite guards forming a living shield around them as they walked through the halls of Eclipse Moon Manor toward the trial that would determine Elena and Silas's fate. Elena felt anger burn through her veins like liquid fire. Her inner wolf roared, demanding that she shift, that she show everyone in the hall exactly what happened when someone tried to slander a silver wolf. But she forced the beast back, knowing that losing control now would only prove Ruth's point about her lack of discipline. Instead, Elena stepped forward, her voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade. Elders, may I respond to these accusations? Mikhail gestured his permission. Elena looked directly at Margaret. You're right, I took extra food. Because I was pregnant and starving. The servant portions barely fed one person, let alone a woman carrying a child. I didn't steal out of greed, I stole to survive, to keep my daughter alive. She turned to Thomas. And yes, I did meet Marcus in the woods. Because we loved each other, and it was the only place we could be together without judgment, without the pressure of the pack hierarchy crushing us. There was nothing sordid about it, it was pure and real and the only beautiful thing in my life. Finally, Elena faced Susan, and there was pain in her voice now. As for seducing Marcus, he courted me first. He sought me out, told me I was worth more than how I was being treated. And yes, I hid our relationship because I knew exactly what would happen if it was discovered, exactly what is happening now. I would be called a gold digger, a manipulator, when all I did was love a man who loved me back. Elder Yuki raised a hand, silencing the hall again. These accusations are serious, but we also understand context. Elena, you claim that you loved Marcus Sterling and that he reciprocated that love. But Ruth Sterling questions the sincerity of that. She suggests that you saw an opportunity to rise in the hierarchy through seduction. Yuki tilted her head. How do you prove true love? How do we differentiate between genuine connection and calculated manipulation? It was an impossible question, and Elena knew it. How did one prove love? But then Silas, still in her arms, stirred. The baby reached out a tiny hand, touching Elena's face, and her eyes flashed gold. And suddenly, a vision flooded the minds of everyone in the hall, not words, but pure memories, transmitted telepathically by the impossible child. They saw Marcus meeting Elena for the first time in the forest, stumbling upon her as she was gathering firewood. They saw how he helped her up, how their eyes met and something clicked between them. They saw months of secret meetings, Marcus bringing Elena food, Elena sewing a tear in his shirt, the two of them laughing together under the stars. They saw Marcus officially propose, kneeling in the snow with a simple ring he had forged himself. They saw their last night together before he left for war, crying in each other's arms, Marcus making Elena promise she would wait for him. And they saw the moment Elena received the news of his death, collapsing on the basement floor, screaming silently so as not to be heard, clutching her stomach where her baby was growing, the only part of Marcus left. The visions faded, leaving the hall in stunned silence. Tears streamed down the faces of many of those present, even some of the hardened warriors discreetly wiped their eyes. Ruth Sterling was pale, trembling. Marcus really, her voice broke. He loved her. He truly loved her. Kelvin placed a hand on his wife's shoulder, his own face tormented. Seeing the memories of his dead son, seeing the happiness in Marcus's eyes when he looked at Elena, it was undeniable. Marcus had not been seduced or manipulated. He had chosen Elena, with full knowledge of the social consequences, because to him, she was worth the risk. Elder Thaddeus spoke, his voice hoarse with emotion. The child showed us the truth in a way that no witness could falsify. Silver wolves have many abilities, but among the rarest is the transmission of true memory, impossible to falsify or manipulate. He looked at Ruth with something akin to pity. Your son loved this woman, Luna Ruth. And she loved him in return. Any accusation of manipulation is now completely discredited. Mikhail nodded slowly. So we've established that the relationship was genuine. But that doesn't completely address the issue of parental suitability. Elena, you awakened your wolf today. You have no training in combat, in power control, in pack politics. How do you intend to teach these things to a child who will need them to survive? Elena took a deep breath, knowing that her next answer could determine everything. Elders, I cannot teach Silas these things, not yet. But I can learn. And while I learn, I accept the offer of protection from Alpha King Silas Thorne, who has offered not only physical safety, but also training and guidance. She looked at Silas Thorne, who was standing in the shadows at the side of the hall. I am not foolish enough to think I can do this alone. But I will not hand my daughter over to those who condemned her to death just hours ago, no matter how qualified they may be to teach her. The defiance in her voice was unmistakable, and the entire hall held its breath, waiting to see how the council would react. Mikhail rose from his throne, and the movement instantly silenced all conversation in the hall. The other four elders also rose, forming a menacing semicircle around their thrones. The council will deliberate in private, Mikhail announced, his voice echoing with ancestral power. Elena Vance, Silas Sterling Vance, Alpha Kelvin Sterling, Luna Ruth Sterling, you will remain here while we consider not only the custody of this child, but also the larger implications of her awakening for our species." The 5 elders closed their eyes simultaneously, and a dome of translucent silver energy formed around them, blocking sound and sight. Through the dome, Elena could see silhouettes moving, mouths moving in heated debate, but no sound escaped. She held Silas closer, feeling the baby tremble slightly. Even the powerful child could sense the oppressive tension in the room. The silence stretched on for minutes that felt like hours, with every person in the hall perfectly still, barely daring to breathe. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was probably only 15 minutes, the energy dome dissipated like morning mist. The elders resumed their seats on their thrones, their faces inscrutable and serious. Mikhail spoke, his voice carrying the weight of final judgment. "After deliberation, this council has reached a 3-part decision. First, we officially recognize Elena Vance as a silver wolf of pure Argentum lineage, and Silas Sterling Vance as the first full-blooded silver pup born in 3 millennia. They have all the rights, privileges, and protections that this status confers." A murmur of approval rippled through the hall, but Mikhail raised his hand for silence. "Second, regarding custody, we have determined that separating such a young cub from her mother would be a violation of the most sacred Argentum law. Elena Vance retains full custody of Silas until the child reaches the age of majority at 18. No pack, no individual, not even this council can overturn that decision." Ruth Sterling let out a stifled sob, but did not protest. She knew that challenging the council would be suicide. Kelvin squeezed his wife's hand, his face a mask of controlled defeat. Third, Mikhail continued, his white eyes somehow fixed on Kelvin and Ruth. "As for the rights of grandparents Alpha Kelvin and Luna Ruth Sterling, while we recognize your blood connection to the child, your actions today have demonstrated profoundly flawed judgment." Luna Ruth specifically attempted to condemn her own granddaughter to death out of prejudice and pride. The censure in his voice was devastating. "Therefore, we decree the following: Kelvin and Ruth Sterling will be allowed to meet Silas and potentially develop a relationship with her, but only under the supervision of Elena Vance and only if Elena allows it. She has absolute veto power over any interaction. If at any time Elena feels that they pose a threat to her daughter's physical or emotional well-being, she may cut off access completely, and this council will support that decision." Mikhail looked directly at Ruth. "You will have to earn the right to be grandparents, Luna Ruth. It is not simply given by blood, it must be earned through actions worthy of redemption." Ruth nodded, tears now streaming freely, all her pride destroyed. "I understand, Elder Mikhail. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to redeem myself for what I did today." Elena felt something loosen in her chest, not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of the possibility of future forgiveness. The council had spoken, and justice had been served. But before anyone could breathe a sigh of relief, the windows of the great hall exploded inward in a shower of glass and splintered wood. Masked figures clad in black armor stormed through the openings, their faces hidden behind silver masks that glinted ominously in the firelight. "Pure bloods," someone shouted, and the hall erupted into chaos. The invaders moved with military precision, forming a circle around the center of the hall where Elena stood with Silas, their weapons, silver-coated swords and crossbows loaded with aconite arrows, aimed directly at the mother and daughter. A tall man emerged from the fog of battle, wearing white robes stained with red symbols that Elena recognized from ancient texts, the leader of the purebloods, Valerius, whose name was whispered with fear in every wolf pack. "The abomination ends today." Valerius roared, his voice magically amplified to echo over the chaos. 3,000 years we have worked to purify our kind of this silver curse, and we will not allow it to return. Elena did not think, did not hesitate. She handed Silas to Silas Thorne, who had materialized beside her in a blur of supernatural speed. "Protect her," Elena commanded, then transformed into a burst of silver light so bright it blinded half the attackers. The colossal wolf that was Elena lunged at the front line of the purebloods, her jaws closing around the first attacker's neck and crushing his windpipe in a single deadly motion. Blood spattered in a crimson arc, but Elena didn't stop. She spun, her claws tearing through armor like paper, sending 3 invaders flying across the hall. Around her, the wolves of the Eclipse Moon Pack finally reacted, transforming and joining the battle. Ironically, Kelvin and Ruth fought back-to-back with Elena, protecting the path to where Silas Thorne had taken baby Silas to a safer corner. "For my granddaughter!" Ruth screamed, her wolf form, an elegant but deadly grey wolf, tearing the throat of a pureblood who tried to pass her. The Luna who had condemned the child to death hours ago now fought fiercely to protect her, seeking redemption in blood and violence. Valerius was no ordinary leader of the purebloods, he was a blood wizard, someone who had studied forbidden magic for centuries. He raised his staff, studded with a pulsing purple gem, and waves of sonic energy exploded from it, causing all the wolves in the hall to fall to their knees in agony. Elena felt her eardrums nearly burst, felt blood trickle from her ears, but through the pain she heard something more important, Silas's cry, terrified and calling for his mother telepathically, "Mommy! Mommy!" That cry broke something in Elena, not a seal this time, but a limiter, the last barrier between her and the full power of the Argentum bloodline that slept in her veins. She stood up, impossible under the sonic pressure that had knocked down even the elders, and her eyes were no longer just golden, they burned like 2 miniature suns, shining so brightly that Valerius had to look away. Elena opened her mouth and did not roar, she commanded, and the voice that came out was not that of a wolf or a woman, but of a primordial goddess, "Enough." The single word carried so much power that Valerius' staff exploded in her hands, the gem shattering into 1,000 fragments. The sonic wave ceased instantly, and in the vacuum of silence that followed, Elena raised a massive paw toward the remaining purebloods. Beams of pure silver energy exploded from her claws, not killing but banishing. The invaders were pulled through portals of light that opened in the air, screaming as they were sent across dimensions to places only Elena, in her expanded consciousness, could perceive. Within seconds, the hall was cleared of invaders, except for Valerius, who knelt, trembling, before the silver wolf who had become something beyond mortal. "You have hunted my kind for 3,000 years, Elena said, her voice echoing with ancient power, and now you will pay for every life taken, every family destroyed." She did not kill him, instead, she placed a paw on his forehead, and Valerius screamed as memories flooded his mind, memories of all the victims of the purebloods, 3 millennia of pain and death that he would now carry forever in his consciousness, a mental prison from which he would never escape. Part 12, Epilogue, Return to the Tomb, paragraphs 81-82. 3 months later, Elena stood before Marcus Sterling's grave, but this time she was neither alone nor afraid. She wore a silver silk dress, a moonstone crown woven into her hair, and at her side stood Silas Thorne, no longer just her protector, but her chosen mate, her king. In Elena's arms was Silas, now 5 months old, who already showed remarkable control over his powers, switching between human and puppy form at will. The cemetery had been transformed, Ruth Sterling had planted silver flowers everywhere, turning the site of her greatest shame into a sanctuary of redemption. Ruth herself was kneeling beside the grave, placing more flowers with trembling hands, when Elena approached. "Luna Ruth," Elena said softly, and Ruth looked up with eyes red from crying. "You have worked hard these 3 months, proving your repentance through actions, not just words." Elena knelt beside Ruth, allowing the grandmother to gently touch Silas's face for the first time without direct supervision. The baby looked up at Ruth with those emerald green eyes so much like Marcus's, and something passed between them, not complete forgiveness, but acceptance. "Marcus would be proud of her," Ruth whispered, tears streaming down her face. "And he would be ashamed of me, but as you said, he believed in second chances." Elena placed her hand over Ruth's. "You can be part of Silas's life, but on one condition, that you never forget that love, not lineage, not hierarchy, is what makes someone worthy." Ruth nodded, embracing Elena for the first time, 2 women united not by choice but by a child who carried the best of both worlds. Marcella touched her father's tombstone with her little hand, and the marble glistened in pure silver, the spirit of Marcus recognizing his daughter, blessing the peace that had finally arrived. "I never gave up," Elena whispered to the grave, holding both Ruth and Silas. "Even when you cast me out of this grave, Ruth, I would never give up on Marcus's daughter, because true love never gives up, not even in death."